Can a single African nation stand up to a Western superpower and take back control of its resources? Can a country that's been exploited for decades finally break free and rewrite its destiny? In a bold move that's sending shockwaves through Europe and beyond, Niger has decided to kick out Orano, France's largest uranium company, ending a 71-year-old stranglehold over its mineral wealth. For decades, France has mined Niger's uranium at dirt-cheap prices, using it to light up European cities while Nigerians live in darkness. But those days are over. The new military government is turning the tables, demanding fair compensation and full control over their resources. This isn't just about one company. It's about a nation reclaiming its sovereignty, and it's a wake-up call for all of Africa. Will Nigeria's daring stance inspire other nations to follow suit? Or will France fight tooth and nail to regain its grip? Let's find out. Niger's story won't just inspire African nations and change them. It will have a huge impact on Western nations. Those nations always depending on Niger's resources will face a hard time. But how would they cope? Would they let go of a nation like Niger? We will find that out in today's video. We will also talk about the history of French exploitation in Niger and why Orano's control over uranium has been so controversial. We will also discuss the recent military coup that toppled Bazoum and set the stage for Niger's newfound defiance. And most importantly, how Niger's renegotiation of uranium prices is shaking global markets. This is a story of defiance, resilience, and the reclaiming of dignity. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why Niger's actions could change the course of history, not just for itself, but for the entire African continent. For more than 7 decades, Niger has been the silent backbone of France's energy dominance. The French company Orano, formerly known as Areva, has been extracting uranium from Niger since 1953, providing the critical fuel needed to power France's extensive nuclear energy program. Today, nearly 70% of France's electricity comes from nuclear power, making it one of the world's largest exporters of electricity. But behind the glittering lights of Paris lies a dark truth. Niger, despite being one of the top producers of uranium, remains one of the world's poorest countries. Let's put this into perspective. While the Eiffel Tower sparkles with lights every night, over 80% of Niger's population lives without access to electricity. It's a glaring paradox. How can a country so rich in resources be so poor? The answer lies in the exploitative contracts that have been in place for decades. Contracts that have benefited French corporations at the expense of the people of Niger. For years, Orano was able to purchase uranium from Niger at a meager price of 80 cents per kilogram. To put that in context, the same quality uranium from Canada was being bought at around 200 euros per kilogram. This stark difference highlights the extent of the exploitation. Under the pro-French leadership of former President Bazoum, these lopsided deals continued unchallenged. But the people of Niger were growing restless. They could see their wealth being siphoned off, while their children went hungry and their infrastructure crumbled. This exploitation became a rallying cry for the military, which ousted Bazoum in July 2023. General Abdoulaye Chiani, the new leader, wasted no time in making his intentions clear. Niger would no longer be France's playground. One of his first orders of business was to renegotiate the uranium contracts that had long been skewed in favor of the French. By September 20th, 2023, the military government announced that the price of Niger's uranium would be raised to 200 euros per kilogram, the same rate that Canada enjoys. This move sent shockwaves through the global uranium market, causing prices to spike and leaving French energy companies scrambling to adjust. But this was only the beginning. The new government didn't just want a fair price for its uranium, it wanted full control over its resources. In a dramatic move, the regime announced the creation of a state-owned mining company, the Société Nationale de Patrimoine Minier, which would take over the extraction and sale of uranium. Orano, once untouchable, was suddenly on the outside looking in. However, Reclaiming control over uranium is easier said than done. The new government now faces the monumental task of building its mining infrastructure, training local engineers, and securing new markets for its uranium. But for the people of Niger, this is a long overdue step towards self-determination. And the impact of this decision? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The international response was swift and predictable. Western powers, particularly France, were outraged. Accusations of human rights violations and calls for sanctions began to circulate. But General Chiani was undeterred. He had seen the devastating impact of foreign exploitation on his country and was determined to change the narrative. In a fiery speech, he declared, "Niger's resources belong to the people of Niger, and it's time we take control of our destiny." The regime's defiance of the West was not without its risks. France, which had been heavily reliant on Niger's uranium for its energy needs, was not about to let go of its influence so easily. But the new leaders in Niamey had a plan. Rather than trying to placate the West, they turned to Eastern powers like China and Russia. Both nations were quick to extend a hand of friendship. China, which has been expanding its footprint across Africa through its Belt and Road Initiative, saw an opportunity to gain a foothold in Niger's resource-rich landscape. Meanwhile, Russia, looking to counterbalance Western influence in Africa, offered military and economic support. Within weeks, agreements were signed, and Niger found itself with new allies who were willing to respect its sovereignty. But this shift in alliances came with its own set of challenges. Critics warned that by aligning with China and Russia, Niger was simply replacing one form of dependency with another. However, the military government insisted that these new partnerships would be based on mutual respect and shared interests. In a statement, General Chiani said, "We will not repeat the mistakes of the past. Our partnerships will be on our terms, not theirs." Niger's new direction is fraught with risks. By challenging a superpower like France, the country is effectively putting itself in the crosshairs. Economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and even covert destabilization efforts are not out of the question. The recent blockade encouraged by France, which has cut off vital trade routes through Benin, is a clear example of the lengths to which Western powers are willing to go to maintain control. But for Niger's new leaders, the risk is worth the reward. They believe that by reclaiming control over their resources, they can break free from the cycle of poverty and dependence that has plagued their country for decades. The government has already begun investing in domestic industries, from agriculture to mining, to build a self-sufficient economy. The people of Niger are watching closely. While many are hopeful that this new era will bring prosperity, others are wary of the potential fallout. But one thing is certain: the days of Niger being a passive player on the global stage are over. The country is taking bold steps to secure its future, and the world is paying attention. What's next? The question on everyone's mind is whether Niger can withstand the economic pressure long enough to force the West to the negotiating table. History offers mixed lessons. Countries like Cuba and Iran have managed to survive decades of sanctions by building self-reliant economies and forging new alliances. But for every success story, there are cautionary tales, like Venezuela, where economic isolation led to severe hardship. Niger's leaders are confident that by leveraging their uranium resources and aligning with new partners, they can weather the storm. But the challenges are immense. Building a self-sufficient economy takes time, and the people of Niger may not have the luxury of waiting. As the blockade drags on, the risk of social unrest grows. Yet, in Niamey, there is a sense of determination. The nations won't back down that easily. But while everyone is talking about the problems Niger will face, let's talk about the problems France and the world will face after the loss of exploited resources. For France, Niger's decision to nationalize its uranium sector is nothing short of a crisis. This sudden spike in the price of uranium is already causing ripples in the global market, pushing energy costs higher at a time when Europe is grappling with the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has already driven up energy prices. The implications go beyond just higher utility bills for French citizens. The loss of cheap uranium could undermine France's position as the world's largest exporter of electricity. Countries that have long relied on French electricity, such as Belgium, Germany, and Spain, may now face shortages or price hikes, leading to a cascading effect throughout Europe. But it's not just France that's feeling the heat. The decision by Niger to renegotiate its uranium contracts and assert control over its resources is sending shockwaves through the entire Western energy sector. For years, Western countries have taken the availability of cheap uranium from Africa for granted. With Niger taking a stand, other African nations may be inspired to follow suit, leading to a potential domino effect that could disrupt global supply chains. Western energy companies, already stretched thin by disruptions caused by the Russia-Ukraine war, are now scrambling to secure new sources of uranium. However, shifting away from Niger's high-quality uranium won't be easy. Alternative sources such as Canada and Australia are not only more expensive but also come with logistical challenges that could take years to resolve. In the short term, the West may face a surge in uranium prices, which could drive up the cost of nuclear energy, affecting everything from electricity bills to the prices of goods that rely on energy-intensive manufacturing processes. The European Union, which has been pushing for a green energy transition, may now face setbacks as nuclear energy, a key component of its strategy, becomes more costly. Beyond the economic impact, Niger's bold move is also reshaping geopolitical alliances. For decades, Africa has been seen as a region where Western powers could exert influence with little resistance. But Niger's pivot towards Russia and China marks a significant shift in the global power dynamic. It signals to other African nations that there are alternatives to Western hegemony. For the West, this shift is deeply concerning. The presence of Chinese and Russian influence in a region as resource-rich as Africa threatens to undermine Western interests, not just in energy, but in other critical sectors like rare earth minerals and oil. The US, which has been wary of China's growing footprint in Africa, may now have to rethink its strategy for engaging with the continent. Niger's decision to cut off cheap uranium supplies is not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a larger trend of resource nationalism that is sweeping across the global south. Countries like Indonesia, Chile, and Peru have also begun to assert greater control over their natural resources, challenging the traditional Western-dominated supply chains. The impact on global supply chains is already being felt. With uranium prices skyrocketing, industries that rely on nuclear energy, such as aerospace, defense, and pharmaceuticals, are bracing for disruptions. The pharmaceutical industry in particular relies on nuclear isotopes for cancer treatments and diagnostic imaging. A prolonged shortage of uranium could delay treatments and increase healthcare costs, especially in countries that are already facing budget constraints. While France is feeling the immediate impact, the United States is also closely watching the developments in Niger. For years, the US has maintained military bases in West Africa under the guise of counterterrorism efforts. However, the real motivation has often been to secure access to resources and maintain geopolitical influence. The military coup in Niger and the subsequent rejection of Western influence could signal a larger trend. If other countries in the region follow Niger's lead, the US may find its military presence in Africa increasingly unwelcome. The recent closure of airspace to French military flights over Mali and Burkina Faso is a clear indication that the West's grip on Africa is slipping. In response, the US may be forced to reconsider its strategy in Africa, potentially increasing aid and investment to win back the goodwill of African nations. However, with Russia and China offering no-strings-attached deals, the West's traditional methods of influence may no longer be as effective. Niger's actions could be the spark that ignites a new era of resource nationalism across Africa and beyond. By taking control of its uranium resources, Niger is setting a powerful example for other nations that have long been exploited for their natural wealth. Countries rich in oil, gas, and rare earth minerals are watching closely, and many are already considering similar moves to renegotiate contracts with Western corporations. If this trend continues, the global economy could see a significant shift in the coming years. Western corporations, which have long relied on cheap resources from the global south, may find themselves having to pay a fairer price. This could lead to higher costs for consumers in the West, but it could also lead to more equitable economic growth in resource-rich developing nations. As Niger stands firm in its decision, the world is left wondering, is this the beginning of the end for Western dominance in Africa? Or is it merely a bump in the road for Western powers who have dominated the continent for so long? The coming months will be crucial in determining whether Niger's bold move will inspire a larger movement towards self-reliance and independence in Africa. And what if Africa finally ends up owning its resources? How would that impact Africa? For far too long, Africa's story has been one of paradox, rich in resources but poor in economic outcomes. This discrepancy has largely been due to the exploitative practices of foreign corporations and governments that have extracted the continent's wealth at a fraction of its true value.
West Africa, which is made up of 16 countries, and all of these countries today are in the embrace of neo-colonial exploitation and oppression.
The scenario where Africa gains full control over its resources marks the beginning of a new narrative, one where the continent's wealth directly benefits its people. Imagine a future where countries like Nigeria, Angola, and South Sudan take full ownership of their oil reserves, renegotiating contracts to ensure that a larger share of profits remains within their borders. Instead of being funneled to Western corporations, these funds could be invested in infrastructure projects, education, healthcare, and technological innovation. This would not only improve the quality of life for millions, but also lay the foundation for sustainable economic growth. Niger's recent decision to nationalize its uranium industry is just the tip of the iceberg. If other African nations follow suit, we could witness a shift where the continent's vast mineral wealth is used to build new roads, hospitals, and schools. For instance, countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, rich in cobalt, essential for electric vehicles, could transform into economic powerhouses by leveraging their resources more effectively. By taking control of their resources, African nations would be empowered to develop their industries. This could spark an era of industrialization similar to what China experienced in the late 20th century. Currently, Africa exports raw materials at low prices only to buy back processed goods at much higher rates. But what if the continent could process its resources? Imagine South Africa, the world's largest producer of platinum, investing in refining capabilities to produce high-value products like catalytic converters or even electric vehicle batteries. By keeping the entire value chain within the continent, African countries could create millions of jobs, reduce unemployment, and stimulate economic growth. The impact on youth unemployment, one of the continent's most pressing issues, would be transformative. With nearly 60% of Africa's population under the age of 25, the potential for a demographic dividend is enormous. By creating jobs in mining, manufacturing, and technology, countries could turn this youthful energy into a driving force for economic development. A resource-rich Africa that controls its wealth would inevitably shift the global balance of power. For decades, Western countries have maintained dominance over Africa by controlling its resources. However, if African nations were to collectively nationalize their resources, they could become significant players in the global market. Take the energy sector, for example. Africa is home to about 8% of the world's proven oil reserves and 7% of its natural gas reserves. If African countries were to fully control and regulate these resources, they could significantly influence global energy prices. This newfound leverage could allow African leaders to negotiate better trade deals, secure investments, and even exert political influence on the global stage. Moreover, controlling critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements could turn Africa into a key player in the global shift toward green technology. As the world moves towards electric vehicles and renewable energy, these resources will become even more valuable. An Africa that controls its supply chains could become the leading supplier of the raw materials needed for the energy transition, giving the continent unprecedented bargaining power. Another significant impact of resource control would be a reduction in Africa's dependency on foreign aid and loans. Today, many African nations are burdened with debt, often tied to exploitative conditions imposed by Western institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. By harnessing its resources, Africa could generate the revenue needed to fund its development independently. Countries like Angola, which has been heavily indebted to China for infrastructure projects, could instead use its oil wealth to fund domestic projects. Similarly, nations like Ghana and Kenya, which have borrowed billions to build roads and power plants, could turn to their own gold and geothermal resources to finance such endeavors. You can guess the implications for African sovereignty if countries were no longer tied to foreign creditors. The ability to dictate the terms of development and set national priorities without external interference would be a game changer. Nations could focus on long-term projects like renewable energy, education, and healthcare, ensuring sustainable growth rather than short-term gains. Niger's bold move to reclaim its uranium resources has already sparked discussions across the continent about resource nationalism. If more countries adopt this approach, it could lead to a resurgence of Pan-Africanism, where African nations work together to protect their interests. But can Africa truly take control of its destiny, or will it be stopped by the West? Let us know in the comments section how long you think it will take. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.